In the prison dining hall, Marcus Kane, once a man who wore the police badge, suddenly slammed the table, then charged straight toward female guard Elena Ward with a food tray in his hand as if it were a weapon. The clang of metal rang out sharply, and the prisoners around him held their breath in anticipation. He raised his arm, as though the power of his past had returned, but only a moment later, all of his arrogance was crushed beneath her cold, unyielding gaze. Ponituri. Before we continue, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts about this story. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit like and share so more people can see it. Most importantly, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We post fresh content every day at the same time. A dramatic story. The old prison perched precariously on the edge of an industrial hill, where the wind moaned through the bars, echoing like the tortured screech of weary metal. That night, the clouds hung so low it felt as though someone had dragged the entire sky down, pressing it against the rust-stained tin roof. The flickering, fluorescent lights carved pale streaks across the cold concrete floor, like blades slicing away at the darkness. The air was thick with disinfectant, sweat, and mildew, heavy, familiar, and unavoidable, filling the lungs of everyone still awake. The prison lived by its own rhythm. The thud of boots, the snap of locks, the muffled murmur of conversation swallowed by thick walls. But that night, the rhythm faltered, half a beat out of sync. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen. The first sound that broke the night was the clatter of chains. Not just rattling, but rolling, thundering down the corridor like a string of distant storms. Then came the footsteps. Dragging, dry, relentless. Shoes of coarse gray cloth scraped against the floor, each step a feeble challenge to the frozen concrete beneath. Prisoners, creatures who thrived in shadows, instantly sensed the disturbance. They pressed against their bars, eyes flashing like blades. Curious, bitter, amused. A few whistles cut through the silence, but quickly died away, as though even mockery dared not last more than a breath. At the end of the corridor, the figure of a man emerged. Under the pale, sputtering light, his face looked carved from cold stone. His chin lifted higher than necessary, his shoulders pulled wide as though draped in an invisible armor of arrogance. Shackled hands did not slow his gait. He moved with the swagger of one who once commanded a city to bow. His crooked smirk, joyless, dripping with contempt, clung to his lips like hardened tar. His name was Marcus Kane, a name once powerful enough to make files vanish, testimonies twist, and bright eyes dim into submission. In the past, Rome, when Kane walked by, caps were raised higher, shoes shone brighter, doors opened quicker. The badge on his chest had been both talisman and sentence. He knew the law. He bent the law. He was the law, or at least, he had been. But tonight, the badge was gone. Replaced by the gray uniform worn by those stripped of names. The shackles clamped tight, cold as a metal handshake, bit into his wrists. All the weapons Kane had wielded, fear, guns, networks, authority, had crumbled away like dead moss. Only the habit of power remained. The lifted chin, the narrowed eyes, the smirk hooked stubbornly into his pride. A whisper came from behind the bars. "Is that him? That's him, isn't it?" Another voice, slower. "Yeah, the one they said no one could touch." Then silence. The hush spread like an oil slick across the water. At the far end of the corridor, Elena Ward stood tall. Not stiff like a wooden post, but upright like an anchored spine, certain of its place. Her uniform was pressed sharp, the creases disciplined in their own right. The keys at her hip knocked together with a dull metallic clink, a sound unforgettable after just one hearing, because it carried weight, carried responsibility, carried judgment. Her eyes did not search. They held. When her gaze locked onto Kane, his smirk faltered into a thin crack. Yeah, he recognized her. Not the way one recognizes a familiar face, but the way a guilty man recognizes the moment his debts come due. Memory surged like ink that would not fade. An interrogation room, blank pages, lies tearing into truth like claws. The name Thomas Ward rang in his head. The man dragged away as his wife screamed herself hoarse. To Kane, he had been a mere target, a number, a pawn sacrificed for a tidy statistic. He had laughed as his signature turned an innocent man into a criminal record. He had turned his back as a family collapsed. Elena stared without blinking. No trembling, no explosive fury. Her anger had burned through the noisy fire of youth and hardened into a steady ember. In her gaze was the calm only found in those who have weathered storms and learned to read them from afar. The escorting guard stopped in front of her. One recited the prisoner's number, the charges, the assigned block. His voice struck the concrete like chalk snapping lines. No wasted syllables, no excess breath. Elena nodded once. She stepped forward half a pace, close enough for Kane to see the muscles of her jaw were not clenched, yet ready. Kane tilted his head, grasping for balance in the performance he still believed he directed. Well, he drawled, his voice stretching as though this prison were his stage. Life really does go in circles, doesn't it? No one answered. The guard's silence was procedure. Oh, the prisoner's silence was that of wolves scenting blood. Elena's silence, that was will. The night thickened around the corridor like a black curtain slashed by harsh beams of light. The square slots in the steel doors, metal eyes flickered on and off, recording, observing. The ceiling fan whirred, stirring the notices tacked on the board, their corners trembling like butterflies pinned in place. Even in the harshness, something austere shone through. Order. The prison, scarred by time, still breathed its rhythm, counts, transfers, locks, reports. Each action was a link, each person a cog. And within this closed world, the man who once stood above the law now had to relearn how to walk under it. That was Kane's first lesson. And the one to grade his exam was not a judge, not a jury, but the daughter of the family he thought lost in ruins. A draft slid in through a crack in the door, carrying the scent of distant rain. Someone coughed. Someone cursed under their breath. A prisoner tapped lightly on the bars, not to provoke, but to feel something solid under his hands. All those tiny details, usually blurred together, tonight became sharp, as if the prison itself wanted to witness. Elena raised her hand. Not high, not dramatic. Just a precise motion, signaling the escort to continue. In that instant, every eye from the barred windows to the mossy corners snapped to her. Kane curled his lip, plastering arrogance back onto his face. He thought one well-timed insult would ignite laughter, drag her into his game. It had worked countless times out there, but this was not out there. Her keys clinked once more. Just a single note. Yet to Kane, it was a reminder of every door he would never again open, every room he would only enter under guard. He swallowed dryly. Far down the corridor, an old fuse sputtered, the lights dimming for a heartbeat before returning. That sliver of darkness etched Elena's eyes into sharp steel, calm, unyielding, forged by memory. Not a wild, shouting anger, but a tempered resolve. Marcus Kane turned his head slightly, as if to evade her stare, then forced himself still. He knew too well that any sign of retreat among wolves carried a scent. He could not let them smell it. Not ever. So he opened his mouth, ready to fling the only weapons he still had. Insults, mockery, lies. But just then, the shift whistle blared, cleaving the air. Guards rotated. Gah. New rosters exchanged. Elena signed her name with a clipped stroke. Kane's performance, his grand entrance, was cut short, like a string snapped too soon. His lips pressed tight, smirk washed away like chalk under wet cloth. "Move," a guard's calm voice ordered. Not loud, not harsh, but with the weight of routine, the kind of authority fleeting power envies. The procession moved on, chains, boots, keys, 3 sounds layering into a steady rhythm. Inside the cells, eyes watched like black stars. They didn't need the details. They only needed to know the core, who held the rhythm tonight. And though unspoken, the answer etched itself on steel. At the corridor's end, before the turn into intake, Elena paused half a second, just long enough for her shadow to stretch across the floor and touch the tips of Kane's shoes. Not threatening, but declaring. She turned away without a word. Yet the air shifted. Less noise, less bravado, fewer sharp laughs. The prison returned to its rhythm. Only the newcomer, the man who once called himself a storm, was left to learn his first lesson in silence. Much more would come: meals, counts, sudden searches, cold stares, heated whispers. But tonight, the opening was written. The man who had once abused power had stepped into the place where power bore a name. And the girl from the shattered family now carried the keys. No declaration needed. No banners. Only the quiet clink of keys was enough. Marcus Kane's passed once. Marcus Kane was not just a police officer. He was a man who knew how to exploit every crack in power. He entered the force with a crisp new uniform, eyes shining with the belief that he belonged among the protectors of justice. But within just a few years, Kane had learned his first lesson. Power only has value when it is used to control others. Kane discovered that numbers in reports could be adjusted, that words in testimonies could be bent. Every case wasn't a pursuit of justice. It was an opportunity for promotion, for profit, or simply to tighten his grip. The innocent were framed when he needed quick results. The truly guilty walked free, as long as they were useful or paid enough. Kane mastered the art of exchange. Justice as a commodity, one only he could sell. He became infamous, or not for integrity, but for being efficient. Efficiency meant cases closed quickly, statistics looking perfect, superiors kept satisfied. No one dared look too closely. And if they did, they were pulled into Kane's web, a web sticky with blood and money. Kane understood one truth. Everything had a price. As long as he wore the uniform, he was the law. And when he smiled, the whole room fell silent. Among the pawns sacrificed for Kane's ambitions was Thomas Ward, a father, a simple laborer. No wealth, no power, no connections. Just a working man who came home with calloused hands and placed his meager wages on the kitchen table so his wife could feed their family. But one day, Kane needed a culprit. The case lacked a suspect. The press was growling, the brass demanding results. And Thomas Ward, unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, became the chosen name. Kane did what he did best. He bent the truth. A few testimonies rewritten. A witness persuaded. A piece of false evidence slipped into the file. And in just days, Thomas Ward transformed from an anonymous worker into a dangerous criminal. That night, when the police stormed in, young Elena, barely a teenager, stood frozen in the corner. She saw her father dragged away, chains rattling, his eyes wide with shock and despair. She heard her mother's screams, her pleas, while Kane's cold voice recited the rites. Kane remembered it clearly, because he had laughed. He laughed as he watched the collapse. To him, it was just a job well done. To Elena, it was the night her world shattered. After that night, Elena's life veered off course. Her mother sank into depression, her health wasting away until she finally broke beneath endless nights of sobbing. Their once warm home became a place filled with silence and shadows. Elena grew up under the stares of neighbors. The daughter of a criminal. At school, whispers followed her. Her father was arrested. He must have been dirty. Even when some weren't sure, they still chose to believe the official file. After all, it bore Marcus Kane's signature. Elena learned one truth. Reality could be twisted. Justice could be sold. And the smile of a corrupt man could destroy an entire family. But she also swore to herself, one day, she would stand in a place where no one could deny the truth. Years later, Elena found her way into security. Not because she trusted the system, but because she trusted discipline. In prison, the rules were clearer than in court. Obey or be crushed. And in that closed world, Elena found her footing. She learned silence. She learned to stand firm. She learned that a single gaze could speak louder than 100 words. Colleagues called her the unshaken guard. Prisoners knew she didn't need to shout or beat them to impose order. One cold glance from her was enough to silence an entire cafeteria. Elena didn't seek blind revenge. But she nurtured another flame, true justice, the kind Kane had stolen from her life. And now, in the damp prison corridor, those two paths crossed. Marcus Kane, the man who once abused power, stood shackled. Elena Ward, the girl who once watched her father dragged away, held the keys. The moment their eyes met, memories flooded back. For Marcus, it was Thomas Ward's desperate pleas, his wife's broken cries, the chaos of that night. For Elena, it was Kane's contemptuous smirk, the one etched forever in her memory. But today, the board had flipped. The man who once signed sentences now wore shackles, and the daughter of the man he destroyed now carried the keys. In silence thick as iron, one question lingered in the air. Would justice emerge from the gray uniform of a prisoner, or from the cold gaze of a guard? The chains still clattered in rhythm, blending with the sound of footsteps. But unlike routine transfers, tonight the corridor felt like a stage. Hundreds of eyes followed. No one spoke. No one laughed. The air was stretched taut, like the string of a violin. Marcus Kane knew it well. And he craved to turn this moment into a performance. A man once accustomed to the press cameras, to podiums and speeches, could not endure the suffocating silence. He needed an audience. He needed laughter, jeers. Every eye turned toward him so he could paint again the image of the unbroken man. His gaze swept across the faces of inmates pressed against the bars. Tattooed hands gripping steel, scarred faces twisted, crooked smiles hungry for drama. Marcus understood. With just one line, he could turn them into his loyal spectators. He snorted, forcing a familiar, worn-out smile. Well, if it isn't little Ward all grown up. His voice echoed down the corridor, sharp as a blade. A few whistles rose. Some prisoners chuckled. Attention locked on him. Marcus pressed on, his tone dripping with mockery. Look at you, Elena. From the daughter of a criminal to standing here in a uniform that doesn't even fit. Those keys at your hip, they look far too heavy for someone like you, don't they? Laughter rippled louder. A few fists pounded the bars in encouragement. Marcus lifted his chin, his half-smile widening. For a moment, he believed he had turned the tables. But Elena did not reply. She did not step back, did not flinch, did not show a hint of discomfort. Her eyes stayed locked on him, cold as steel, still as stone. That silence sliced the air like a thin blade. The laughter faltered, stumbled, and died. Prisoners shifted uneasily. A few even turned away, avoiding her gaze. Marcus felt the first crack, the feeling he despised most, being ignored. He clenched his teeth, forcing the attention back toward him. Marcus growled, his voice louder, harsher. "Do you remember, Elena? The night we dragged your father away?" He cried, begged, pitiful. "And your mother? Oh," she screamed like an animal. "I told her justice had been served. But you and I know, it only took my signature. One word from me. I was the law." His words pounded through the corridor like a hammer. No more laughter. No more jeers. Only silence, thick and suffocating. Even the most hardened criminals felt the cruelty in his tone. Elena stood unmoved, solid as a mountain. Then she began to walk toward him. Her boots struck the floor with deliberate rhythm, each step like a hammer falling, slow, heavy, final. Marcus swallowed hard but refused to retreat. He had always won with words, with confidence. He forced a grin. "Getting closer? Trying to prove you're strong?" Elena stopped a few feet away, tilting her head, her eyes never leaving his, her voice low but clear. "You destroyed my family. My father dragged away in chains. My mother crushed under humiliation. And you thought you'd never pay." Marcus tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Elena stepped closer. "But look at you now. No badge, no gun, no power. Just another inmate, a number in the ledger." The corridor froze in absolute silence. Every prisoner tensed, waiting. Marcus shouted, desperation mixing with rage. "Shut up! You're just a girl pretending to be strong. You think a cheap uniform and a ring of keys make you better than me?" He lunged forward, chains rattling, trying to intimidate. Elena did not hesitate. In one swift motion, she seized his wrist, twisted it back, and slammed him against the concrete wall. The thud reverberated through the corridor, making inmates leap to their feet, gripping the bars tight. Marcus groaned, breath ragged. His face pressed to the wall, his smirk dissolved into raw pain. Elena whispered, her voice carrying far. "You're wrong, Marcus. This isn't strength. This is my job, and I am your guard." A murmur rippled through the block. Not laughter, not cheers, astonishment. The toughest inmates fell silent. Those who had mocked her minutes before now avoided her gaze. A tide shifted within the prison. Power had changed hands. Elena released him. Marcus crumpled to the ground, chains clattering against the concrete. He tried to push himself up, but his back hunched, breath short. For the first time in years, Marcus Kane was no longer master of the stage. He was merely an actor stripped of his mask. Elena turned away, not sparing him a glance. She signaled the guards to continue the transfer. The corridor remained hushed, broken only by the drag of chains and the disciplined rhythm of boots. In the darkness behind the bars, the story was already spreading. No explanation was needed. No report, no gavel. Justice had spoken, not from a courtroom, but from the cold wall and the unwavering hand of a prison guard. After his first clash with Elena Ward, Marcus Kane was thrown into cell 17, a square room of heavy walls and a weary yellow light. Inside, there was only a rickety iron bed, a blanket thinner than paper, and a cold steel toilet in the corner. On that first night, he lay on his back, eyes fixed on the stained ceiling. In his mind, the memory replayed, the slam against the wall, the prisoner's sharp intakes of breath, Elena's cold stare. Each time he closed his eyes, the scene returned like a film reel, merciless and vivid. Marcus had been used to power, to brightly lit rooms where a single nod from him sent a dozen men scrambling to take notes. Now all he had was the drip of a leaky faucet and the smell of rust mixed with sweat. Prison was not like the streets, but it had laws of its own. Here, power didn't lie in guns or badges. It lived in three things: reputation, allies, and silence at the right moment. From the very beginning, Marcus was branded with a story. Whispers spread among the inmates. The arrogant ex-cop was slammed into the wall by the female guard. That story turned him into a joke. And in prison, being a joke meant losing your first layer of armor. He knew, if he didn't turn things around soon, he would be crushed not by the law, but by the hungry eyes waiting to pounce on weakness. Marcus began to seek allies. He picked the biggest men, the bullies of the kitchen, the ones with reputations in the yard. He whispered to them about contacts on the outside, about money he could move, about escape routes he might open, if they stayed loyal. He put his old mask back on, the confident smile, the sharp eyes, the voice that poured honey into ears. To those who hadn't seen the hallway incident, he still seemed formidable, a former cop who might bring opportunity. Within weeks, Marcus thought things were shifting. A few men followed him, some sat with him at meals, others even shielded him when trouble stirred. For a moment, he believed he could rebuild his throne. But he forgot one thing. Elena Ward was still there. Every morning, when her footsteps echoed through the block, conversation stopped. Every eye turned. No one dared stir when she passed. Her presence was like a line drawn across the ground, cutting through every scheme. Marcus began to notice. His allies slipped away whenever Elena appeared. Men who once laughed at his jokes now lowered their heads, hands loosening from the bars. In their eyes, Marcus was no longer authority. Elena was, and the worst part, she never had to say a word. No banging, no threats. Just a glance, and every plan he built unraveled. One afternoon in the yard, Marcus tried again to prove his power. He stood before a group of inmates, his voice booming. "What are you afraid of? A woman in a uniform? She has no power beyond those keys. We are the many. We can bend this place to our will." A few chuckles rang out, but only for seconds. Because then Elena entered the yard. Not loud, not hurried. She walked straight through, her eyes locked on Marcus's group. No one spoke. No one moved. The laughter died instantly. Marcus stiffened, forcing a grin. He turned back to his group. "See? All she has is that stare. If we don't fear her, then..." At that exact moment, Elena stopped directly in front of him. She didn't speak. She simply stood tall, her eyes drilling into him. That silence weighed heavier than any threat. One inmate stepped back, then another. In seconds, his allies melted away like foam. Marcus stood alone, face rigid. Elena hadn't lifted a finger, yet in the eyes of everyone there, he had just been defeated again, by silence. Failing in the yard, Marcus placed his bet on the communal meal. He believed that in the crowd, he could reclaim some dominance. In the noisy hall, thick with the smell of watered-down soup and the clatter of tin trays, Marcus stood and banged his tray on the table. All eyes turned to him. He shouted, "Listen to me. You're letting a woman control you. She isn't the law. She's just someone in a uniform. We are the law here." Murmurs spread. A few men laughed. Marcus lifted his chin, convinced he had lit a spark for rebellion. Then the door opened. Elena walked in. No shouting. No pointing. She simply stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the room. Laughter died at once. Trays stilled. The crowded space grew suffocating. Marcus stood there, face flushed. His hands trembled, but he kept yelling, "See? You all bow to silence. You choose to be her dogs?" He stepped forward, clinging to the illusion of control. But in that moment, Elena struck. In a blur, she blocked his swing, twisted his arm, and drove him to the ground. His tray clattered, food splattering across the floor. The hall froze. No one dared breathe. Elena leaned down, her voice low but caring. You think noise is power, but in here, silence is power. And you will learn that, day after day. She released him, rose tall, and swept her gaze across the crowd. And in that moment, the truth carved itself deep. Marcus Kane was nothing. After that fateful meal, Marcus had no followers left. Men who once sat beside him now avoided him like a plague. Wherever he walked, whispers followed. The cop. The one the female guard crushed. Every time Elena passed, he lowered his head. Not out of fear of being struck, but because her eyes were a mirror, showing him the truth he could not escape. He had lost. And that defeat could never be erased. That noon, the air in the mess hall was thick as smoke. The clang of metal trays, the screech of chairs dragging across the floor, the stench of watered-down soup laced with cheap grease, all of it made the atmosphere heavy. Hundreds of inmates crowded into the wide room, each group occupying its own corner, eyes darting like hidden blades. This was where stories were born. A single word could become legend. A single mistake could turn into an unofficial sentence. And Marcus Kane knew, if he still had a chance to reclaim even a shred of dignity, it would happen here. Marcus entered with the line of inmates, tray in hand. He had rehearsed it in his mind dozens of times. Today, he would speak loudly, mock, make them laugh. If he could win the crowd, Elena would be powerless. He chose the center table deliberately, placing himself where all could see. Around him, his audience sat silent, waiting. Even those who hated him most could not look away from a performance that promised to ignite. Marcus stood, lifting his tray, his voice booming above the noise. Look around you. We are wolves in cages. And you bow to a woman? You let her pull your strings just because she carries the keys? A few laughs broke out. He saw the spark of hope. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice a growl. She is not justice. She is a lie. You all know it. Cops, guards, they're all the same. They use us. They trample us. And today, you let a girl control you? Murmurs spread wider. Some inmates nodded. A few whistled. Heat rushed through Marcus's veins. This time, he believed he could turn the tide. The mess hall doors burst open. Boots struck the floor with steady rhythm. Elena Ward entered. Not rushing, not loud. Just deliberate, solid steps, her eyes sweeping the room. The crowded hall fell silent. Marcus drew a deep breath, forcing his smile. This is the moment, he told himself. I will not back down. He jabbed a finger at her and shouted, There! The false wolf in uniform! You're going to let her order you around? Look at me. I was the law. I made the city tremble. And now I tell you, she is nothing. Elena stopped in the very center of the hall. Every prisoner held their breath. Her gaze locked on Marcus. Cold, piercing, cutting through every layer of pretense. A shiver crawled down Marcus's spine, but he kept shouting, his voice cracking. You think just because you knocked me down once, you stand above everyone? You are not justice. You are just. He lunged forward, tray raised like a weapon. Elena did not wait. In one swift, precise motion, she twisted his arm, snapped his grip, and hurled him to the floor. The crash thundered, his tray smashing against concrete, food splattering across the ground. Gasps erupted across the hall. Prisoners clutched their seats, eyes wide, Marcus lay pinned, his face pressed against the cold floor, breath ragged, eyes bloodshot. And in that instant, he realized the truth. There was no one left beside him. Elena leaned close, her voice low but resonant, carrying to every corner. "You were wrong, Marcus. Justice was never in that rotten badge you wore. Justice is here, in the silence of those who watch you fall." Elena let go. Marcus collapsed, shoulders trembling, sweat dripping down his face. The room was silent, heavy. Then, one by one, prisoners turned their faces away. Not out of contempt, but because he was no longer worth seeing. That indifference weighed heavier than humiliation. In this world, to be unseen was to not exist. And Marcus Kane, who once believed himself untouchable, had vanished into nothing before them all. As Elena walked out, her footsteps echoed like drum beats. Every prisoner followed her with their eyes, but none dared speak. In their gaze, she was no longer just a guard. She was something greater, an embodiment of power that none could defy. And Marcus Kane, sprawled in a puddle of thin soup and scattered food, was left with the bare truth. He had lost completely. Solitary confinement, the room without echo after the mess hall incident. Marcus Kane was taken straight to solitary. The heavy steel doors slammed shut behind him, the thud echoing like a final verdict. In the narrow, windowless room, a sickly yellow light spilled across gray walls, casting broken shadows. Here, there was no noise, no audience, only silence, thick and suffocating, like invisible chains. Marcus sat on the cold iron bed, head bowed. Every plan, every illusion had crumbled to dust. He had once believed he could hold the prison in his grasp, that with sharp words and a handful of followers, he could rebuild his throne. But now, even cheap laughter had abandoned him. In that cell, he faced the one thing he feared most, himself. While Marcus sank into the darkness of oblivion, Elena Ward carried on her work as usual. To her colleagues, she was just a disciplined officer, quiet, efficient, unshaken. But to the inmates, she had become something else, a symbol. They whispered to each other in the yard, in their cells, in the meal line. "She's the one who crushed Marcus Kane. She doesn't need to shout, just one look is enough. Justice has a face, and it walks among us." No one dared challenge her anymore. Even the prison's gang leaders, once untouchable in their own right, lowered their eyes when she passed. They had seen it with their own eyes. The man who stood above the law, who once wielded a badge like a weapon, now trembling under her hand. Day by day, Marcus withered. No more jeers, no more defiance. He sat for hours in silence, staring blankly at the bars. At times, he muttered to himself, clinging to fragments of his former life. But his words dissolved into emptiness. No one listened. No one cared. To the other inmates, he was no longer a man. He was only a story, a whispered lesson. The one who abused power was finally crushed by power. In prison, stories grow larger than life. But the story of Marcus and Elena needed no embellishment. It was powerful enough to stand on its own. They spoke of Elena's unflinching stare, of the slam that pinned Marcus against the wall, of the moment the mess hall fell silent. They called her the Guard of Justice, a title not found in any handbook, yet heavier than any badge. And Marcus? His name now carried only failure, humiliation, ruin. In a world where reputation was the last fortress, he had lost everything. One evening, as the corridor lights flickered, Elena walked her familiar patrol. Her keys clinked faintly at her side, her boots striking steady rhythms like distant drums. None. Prisoners in their cells stayed silent, eyes following her. Passing solitary, she paused. Inside, Marcus sat hunched, motionless, eyes hollow. He lifted his head and met her gaze. No words were spoken, but that silence was the heaviest sentence of all. It reminded him that justice may come late, but it never forgets. Elena turned away, continuing down the corridor, leaving the heavy steel door behind her. The story of that night, of that day, would continue to spread, living in whispers, in lowered eyes when she walked past. And at the end of every telling, one truth echoed. He once abused power, but now she holds the keys to his cell